So we are continuing on this series of Season in the Minors, and again, the World Series is going right now. Again, admit I'm not a huge baseball fan, although I did watch a few innings last night since the Boise State game was not on a channel that I got, but which was good because they played horrible. But anyway, our message isn't about sports, so we're not going to go there. But we are looking at looking at baseball theme because baseball has one of the best farm systems of any professional sports, right? They have these minor leagues, and these that can come up, and they look, again, the ones we tend to not focus on the minors, right? We notice and we follow the people in the majors, and just like in the Bible, we have these books of prophecy. We have the major prophets and the minor prophets, and so, but this series we're focusing on the minors. We're looking at those, and again, just as a source of review. All right, so as we see, books of the Bible, we're focusing, these are the minor prophet books that are at the end of the Old Testament. And again, they are the books that we're studying in this series. And so if you have your Bible with you, I'd encourage you to open with us and find Habakkuk. So Habakkuk is the one that we're focusing on today. And again, they're all grouped at the end of the Old Testament. A lot of them are short. And ones that we typically do not open or read. So that's why we're focusing on them in this series. So as we are doing that, I said we are going to just start off with some quick facts about Habakkuk and the story to kind of set the foundation. Okay, first off is Habakkuk was a prophet at the same time as Jeremiah and Daniel. And so these are both, Jeremiah and Daniel both wrote major prophet books. And so that they were all prophets around the same time at 605 BC, approximately. And also, as we see, Habakkuk is a very unique book in that it is a dialogue between himself and God. And so it is an open, honest dialogue. Again, we see this conversation go back and forth between him and God a few different times, just as we will see today as we read it. And also the unique thing about Habakkuk is that it does not give a specific message for Israel. And again, that's what most of the minor prophet and even major prophet books, they had specific messages for the nation or that situation. And Habakkuk does not give a specific message. In fact, it is more about kind of a bigger picture, right? Looking at kind of the bigger picture situation that they were in, and that's more of what it addresses. However, again, Habakkuk is a very, unique book in that it is very upfront and kind of blunt, and it just tells exactly the truth of how Habakkuk was feeling. And in that, though, is his feelings and frustrations that we're going to see today. They turn into being to actually represent the feeling of much of Judah in a time, and it became their public expression of their frustration with their situation. And so, again, there was no specific message for them, but yet it did become something that the entire nation kind of rested on and valued. And again, just as we saw in week one, we talked about to properly read and interpret prophecy, we need to know what category and purpose it is. And so we'll establish that Habakkuk is a general forth-telling prophecy, which means that it was explaining things at the time it was written, about general life. And like I said, again, this was a general feeling of frustration that the nation had towards God. And so as we, again, jump into this book, so I've given you a few minutes. I hope everybody found Habakkuk, right? Did everybody find it? Okay, and so we're going to jump right into, again, this conversation that happens between Habakkuk, the prophet, and God. And so we start off with Habakkuk just lays out his first complaint. He gives this, he makes his case before God. And so starting in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 2, this is what he says. He says, "How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Violence is everywhere, I cry, but you do not come to save. Must I forever see these evil deeds? Why must I watch all of this misery? Wherever I look, I see destruction and violence. I'm surrounded by people who love to argue and fight. The law has become paralyzed, and there is no justice in the courts. The wicked far outnumber the righteous, so that justice has become perverted." So again, he lays out his grievances against God, right? He comes to him and he calls out God and saying, again, as a prophet, and like I said, he makes his complaint. And he just lays it out very honestly in front of God. And so as we look at these interactions, and we're going to read the text and kind of look at what's in there. And then I'm going to give you kind of Brian's version summary of what his complaint is, okay, and what God says. So we see his complaint. He lays it out. Again, this is the Brian version of what he says. Things are horrible down here. And I try and talk with you about it, and you do nothing. Okay, so again, that's my interpretation, my summary of his complaints. Okay, is that things are horrible. Okay, and everywhere I look, there's violence, there's things going on, just justice is not happening. And he said, I try to come to you, just as he says in that very first verse, right? I ask for help and you do nothing. Hey, so Jeremy, that's the feeling. Hey, things are horrible down here. And I try and talk to you about it and you do nothing. Now, as we read even just this text, and again, as he makes his case against God, and I think as we read this, and I don't know about you, but when I first read that, and I think, wow, he is bold. Right? Like he's going to God and he's just laying out. Even he's telling him the truth of how he feels. Right? He's frustrated. Right? He's looking around at everything around him, at the situation and everything that's going on, and he's mad and he's frustrated. Right? And he's looking at that and he just tells God how it is. Now, as we kind of see this and realize that, again, we're a little bit taken back by that, of being like, wow, he's standing in the face of God and kind of shaking his fist, and I'm just not really sure he should be doing that. Right? And we kind of see that again and see it, but yet at the same time, I think we can all identify with his feelings. Right? We can all sit back and realize that, like, man, you know what? There have been times I've been frustrated with God. There are times that I don't agree with what I see God doing or not doing. Right? And there are times when, again, those have been my feelings within my own heart and mind, and yet I've been a little bit afraid or ashamed to admit it. Right? And there are times when all of us get mad at God at some point. Okay, for some people, it's a small thing, it's a little issue, and for other people, it is huge and, in fact, life-altering when they become mad and frustrated with God. But most of us are not honest with God in the way that Habakkuk is here. Right? Most of us, we have those feelings, and yet we won't admit it to God that we're mad. And it really, if you sit back and think about that, again, God, who is all-knowing and all-powerful, and yet he knows that those are our feelings. Right? Just like he knew those were Habakkuk's feelings at this point, and yet we still are afraid to admit it. All right, so again, one of the things we can learn from him is just that he is brutally honest with God. All right, he's saying, God, I don't understand, and I am frustrated, and I just really wish you would speak. I mean, do something, at least something, right? Show up. And as he calls God out, then God responds to him, right? And comes back with a response, and we see God's response then in verses 5 through 11. And so continuing on in Habakkuk 1, pick up at verse 5, it says, Then the Lord replied, Look around at the nations, look and be amazed, for I am doing something in your own day, something you wouldn't believe even if someone told you about it. I am raising up the Babylonians, a cruel and violent people. They will march across the world and conquer other lands. They are notorious for their cruelty, and they do whatever they like. And then he continues on to describe them in these next few verses about basically how horrible of a people they are. And then God concludes his response in verse 11, where he says, But they are deeply guilty, for their own strength is their God. So God, again, he does respond. He comes back to Habakkuk with an answer. Okay, and he gives them, and again, Brian's version of what God says. Okay, he says, I'm not doing nothing. He says, the evil you speak of will be made right, and I'm going to use the Babylonians to do it. Okay, so first off, again, he pushes back at Habakkuk and says, hey, you say I'm doing nothing. I am doing something. Okay, in fact, what I do, everybody will see. Right? Justice will be had. Okay, I am acting, and I'm going to use the Babylonians to do it. And again, most of God's response, half of God's response, is explaining to Habakkuk how horrible a people they are. right? And saying, again, these people, boy, you want justice, you want people to come in and clean house, these guys will do it. Right? He's like, so here we go. Like, I am acting. And just he says, it will happen in your day. And something that you would not even believe if I told you, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Right? Here it is, right? I am acting. I am doing something. Hey, and I know, shocker, Habakkuk didn't like that answer. Right? And he continues on, and he goes back with God in his next kind of response back to God. After that, and we see in verses 1:12 through 2:1, okay, where he says, okay, his second complaint in his response to God. He says, "O Lord my God, my Holy One, you who are eternal." Right, again, can you tell he's kind of laying it on pretty thick right here, right? He's like, because he's getting more frustrated. Right? He says, "O Lord my God, my Holy One, you are eternal. Surely you do not plan to wipe us out. O Lord, our rock, you have sent these Babylonians to correct us, to punish us from our many sins. But you are pure and cannot stand the sight of evil. Will you wink at their treachery? Should you be silent while the wicked swallow up people that are more righteous than they?" Valid question. Right? Again, he's coming to God and he's being like, God, really? Right? In fact, to summarize, I think what Habakkuk's response to him is God, okay, I hear what you're saying, but that's dumb. Hey, that's his response, right? He's coming, he's like, God, that's dumb. I mean, why does the bad guy always get rewarded and the good guy gets the shaft? Hey, that's, again, my version, right? My summary, okay? And the next fill-in, okay, is, again, his response, again, he's getting more bold to God as he's kind of laying it on, right? He kind of, talks him up a little bit, and he's like, God, I don't agree with what you just told me. In fact, I think that's horrible. Hey, I don't understand why you would act that way. Okay, and again, he's saying, man, he's like, okay, I understand, we're bad, we haven't done what we should, I get this, but look at them. They're way worse. Right? And why are you going to use them to correct us? Right? And he's coming back to God and saying, that God, that doesn't seem like something that you would do. And I don't understand. And again, his frustration, it continues to build as he hears this answer and this dialogue continues. And I don't know about you, but I feel the same way as he does sometimes, that it seems like the way of the world, nothing ever good happens to good people. Right? It's like, why do good people always get pushed down? And it seems like the evil prospers. I try to be faithful. I try and do the things you want and these things, and it just seems like I continue to get knocked down. I continue to get rained on. And God, that's dumb. I don't like it. And that's exactly what Habakkuk tells him. And then we see God comes back at him once again and answers him. In chapter 2, verses 2 through 20 is God's response. We're going to pick up at verse 3. Okay, it says, "This vision is for a future time. It describes the end, and it will be fulfilled. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it will surely take place, and it will not be delayed. Look at the proud. They trust in themselves, and their lives are crooked, but the righteous will live by their faithfulness to God. Wealth is treacherous, and the arrogant are never at rest. They open their mouths as wide as the grave, and like death they are never satisfied. In their greed they have gathered up many nations and swallowed many peoples. But soon their captives will taunt them. They will mock them and saying, 'What sorrow awaits you thieves? Now you will get what you deserve. You've become rich by extortion, but how much longer can this go on? Suddenly your debtors will take action. They will turn on you and take all that you have while you stand trembling and helpless. Because you have plundered many nations, now all the survivors will plunder you.'" And then skipping over to verse 12. And he says, "What sorrow awaits you who build cities with money gained through murder and corruption? Has not the Lord of heaven's armies promised that the wealth of nations will turn to ashes? They work so hard, but all in vain. For as the waters fill the sea, the earth will be filled with an awareness of the glory of the Lord." And now as God responds, Okay, one notice is that, again, the conclusion of there in verse 14 is he ended his last response about the Babylonians about that they were their own gods, right? Like it was their feelings about themselves and all of that. And now here he ends by saying that I am God and I am the one. And again, his response back to Habakkuk was, I am a just God and justice will be served. Okay, and justice will be served on my timeline. And they will get theirs. And so he's telling him, calm down and trust me. Okay, again, as he's been honest and blunt and come before God and given him his true feelings and say, God, I am frustrated. Hey, everything is going horrible. You are doing nothing. I ask you, you don't answer. And I think we can all realize, and identify with that sometimes when you feel like your prayers just bounce off the ceiling and go nowhere. Right? And then he gets in his dialogue with God, and God tells him, hey, I'm going to do something. I'm going to use Babylonians. And he's like, God, that's a horrible plan. Like, I don't get that. Like, that's bad. And then God comes down and says, hey, I am just. Okay? I will judge them as well. And again, their time is coming. Okay, and so calm down and trust me. And then, like I said, as he sees this, as he gets God's response, okay, as you can see through these process, we see this transformation happening in the heart and the attitude of Habakkuk. As we see this dialogue going back and forth, okay, is one, again, he's brutally honest with God about how he's frustrated. And then he gets even more in God's face in his second response. And now we get kind of the conclusion of the book, which is Habakkuk's final response to God in chapter 3. And in verse 2, he starts out and he says, I have heard all about you, Lord. I am filled with awe by your amazing works. In this time of our deep need, help us again as you did in years gone by. And in your anger, remember your mercy. Now, I don't know if you pick it up in the same way I do, but when you read that verse, it is an incredibly different tone than his other, dialogue. He is coming again. We see a transformation happen right in front of us in the middle of this dialogue within Habakkuk and his attitude towards God and the things that he brings to him. Right? In this response, again, as we see a much more humble person. We see a person that, again, has been kind of put in their place by God and realizes that fact and comes then with a very different response. And so again, what is that response? Let's break down what his response is. Okay, first off, the first thing that he does is he remembers how God has acted before. He remembers how God has acted before. Again, he starts off this verse where he says, I have heard all about you, Lord, and I'm filled with awe by your amazing works. Again, he comes back and realizes and remembers. He says, hey, I've heard about you, like you've worked in the past and with the people before us. He's like, and I've also seen your amazing work happen in my life before. Right? He comes back again. He is reminded, he is refocused back on who God is. Right? And the fact that God is listening and God does work. Again, he remembers how God has acted before. He takes a step back from his current situation and says, wait a minute, who is God? Right? You have acted before. And then secondly, in the second part of verse 2, okay, he sees that and remembers that he knows God will follow through in his right timing. And again, he says, in this time of our deep need, help us again. He says, okay, I remember how you've acted before, and now I know, God, that you will act again. Okay, and it will be in your timing. Okay, now, again, we see in chapter 2, God's response back to him as he's teaching Habakkuk, as he's transforming his heart, right, as he's giving him the truth, right? God says in chapter 2, verse 3, he says, if it seems slow, wait patiently, because it will surely take place. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, there have been times that I've prayed and I've been seeking God and asking God to work, and he just does not work when I think he should. Right? Or even do what I think he should do. And at those times, again, we oftentimes come with God, especially in our frustration, be like, God, I've got this figured out. Okay, you don't have to intervene. Like, this is what you got to do. I got it planned out for you. Do it on this time, and it will all work great. So thank you. right? And a lot, again, that's our prayers oftentimes, right? I know in our time, I mean, that has been our prayer before, my prayer before. Again, as we see my three beautiful sons that are here and, around, as you guys have seen them and know them, and I'll say there has been a time for our lives, like I said, we struggled to get pregnant with Cameron. And there was times where we're praying to God and be like, God, it's our timing, our plan. Like, we want him spaced out this far, and why is this not happening? Right, again, we came to God, and we were both frustrated, and when we would not get pregnant, right? And then also we were trying for a girl, and that's a whole other story. But again, we look back at that, though, and realize, right, about like, oh man, like my attitude is, God, I've got this figured out. You don't have to worry about it. Just do it the way I want you to do it. Right? And God's timing is not always what we think is best. Right now, as I look at our family and look at our kids and the way they interact and through that, again, it's good that Cameron's a little further removed from the other two. Again, we look back and know God's timing is better than ours, right? And again, his heart was changed and his attitude was working towards that. He said he knows that God will follow through in the right timing. Okay, there's also a hint in this verse, in this phrase of it, and again, in the NLT version, it doesn't come out as much as it does in other versions, but especially in the NIV one, when he says, again, come to us in our time of great need, help us again as you did, and he's like, please, he kind of says, he's like, God, I know you're gonna, judge the Babylonians, and he kind of says, he's like, and please let me see it when you do. Again, he's kind of throwing that little dig into God and being like, God, I know they're gonna get theirs, but can I please see that when that happens? Because that would really make me happy. And as he kind of goes that out, and then he moves on then again, and to the next step, which is the last part of verse 2, when he says, and in your anger, remember mercy. And what he does there is he looks at himself and not at his enemies. Okay, his focus becomes different. He takes his mind off of the situation and off of the Babylonians and about how he would never think that God could use evil to be just, and about all these things. And then he looks at himself and he realizes, hey, you know what? It doesn't really matter how sinful they are because I am sinful too. Right? And I deserve as much, judgment as they do, right? Because I fall short of who you are. And he focuses on himself. He says, God, in your anger, again, you have a right to be angry with me. Right? But in your anger, remember mercy. Again, now, instead of like he did in the second response, he was kind of laying on the characteristics of God to kind of butter him up before he like slapped him on the face. Right? This time he's remembering God's character of being a merciful God, right? As he comes to him in honesty and saying, God, I mean, you're correct to be upset at me because I am a sinner and I've fallen short, right? And so you're right to be angry with me, but remember your mercy, right? He's using what he knows about God to walk through the transformation of his own heart. And then we see his full response to God, and that is he responds in worship. Because the rest of chapter 3, the rest of the book, is all a worship poem and song that he sings to God in his response. Again, we see this incredible transformation of Habakkuk's heart, right? That he comes to God in frustration and kind of shaking his fist in God's face. And through this process of this conversation that goes through them is this incredible transformation of his perspective and of his heart. And again, what does God have him do? God has him take a time out and step back from the situation and says, hold on, let's talk about this. Right? And yet it starts with him honestly coming before God and telling him the truth. Right? And so many times in our lives, like I said, we are afraid to do that. We are scared to tell God how we really feel. And instead of getting it out and talking it through, like Habakkuk does, we just hold it in. And anger turns into bitterness. Right? And bitterness, as it spreads like cancer through our lives and our relationships and our attitudes, it literally can turn the course of who we are. And as we look at that again, what can we learn from Habakkuk? We can learn the steps we should go through that we see him go through in this conversation about when we don't know the answer, right? Or we are frustrated, or if you're questioning a situation, what do we need to do? Again, he outlines 4 steps for us to do. Okay, number 1, when we don't know the answer, when we're frustrated, when we are questioning a situation, number 1 is we remember the past and how God has come through before. We remember the past and how God's come through before. Because the truth is, if you are a Christian, if you've received Christ as your Savior, then he's come through for you before. Right? And let's remember, again, take a step back out of the situation, whatever's frustrating you, whatever you don't understand, take a step back and look at what do you know about God? How has he acted in the past? Right? When has his timing come through when I didn't get it, but yet now I look back and realize, like, no, that was the best situation. Right? If God would have done it my way, it would have been disastrous. Right? Look at the past. Remember the past. How has God come through before? Okay, then number 2 is look at what you know about God and his character. Again, a foundation of our faith is that God is the uncreated creator. He is the Alpha, the Omega. God is unchanging. Right? And if that's true, then the parts of his character and the things we've seen God portray earlier in our lives are the same things we will see and he will portray in our current situations. Right? We're the ones that are changing, not God. Right? And as God, again, how does his character and intervention in my life transforming me? Right? And when we think about, again, the transformation of our hearts and our minds, right, that's what we call our journey. Right? And how are we journeying forward? How are we coming through? Let's look back into those earlier times of our journey and says, how have we seen God work before? Because those things, again, a forgiving God is still a forgiving God in our current situation. Right? We remember the past, how he's come through before. We look at what we know about God and his character. And then thirdly, then we can then look at ourselves and not the situation. Yeah, we get so focused on the situation and the frustration of, like, God, you need to do this, or why did that person do that, or why do I have this disease, or why do I have this question or doubt? And we get so focused on that situation. Again, if we can take a step back and then we can look at our own selves. God, again, and when we're sitting there like, God, you have never done anything for me, and as we do those first 2 things, we realize, oh man, God, you've done a lot for me. Right? And again, how, just as Habakkuk does, he says, Lord, in your anger, like, you have right. Again, I have fallen short. I haven't done the right things, right? We can look again at ourselves, at our own transformation, right? We focus then on ourselves, and instead of comparing to everybody else, right? We'll be like, well, God, they never go to church. I go once a month. Like, you should be treating me better. Right? Maybe we should focus on the fact that, well, maybe I haven't opened my Bible in a long time. Right? I need to look at myself, right, and not the situation. And then number 4 is then I will then respond based on all the truths that we've looked at and the truths of your faith. All right, God calls out in chapter 2, he's telling Habakkuk what to do here. Right, number 1, in his timing, right, in verse 3, in chapter 2, verse 3, he says, if my timing seems slow, then wait. Right, because I am acting. And then in chapter 2, verse 4, right, God tells him, he says, but the righteous will live by their faithfulness. Right, saying, again, are you going to respond on these truths of who I am? Right, trust in my timing and respond based on, again, by your faith and by your faithfulness in me. You respond based on the facts and the truth that you remember, not on your feelings of the situation that you find yourself in, or the source of your frustration. And again, over and over again throughout Scripture, we see that we cannot always trust our own feelings. Okay, but yet, again, just as God is telling Habakkuk to do, and we see him work through that process, he's telling us, hey, when your feelings are leading you down the wrong way, take a time out. And look back. Remember how I've worked before. Look at what you know about God and his character. Okay, and then again, look at myself and saying, where maybe have I continued to fall short? Wow, my choices contributed to this situation. And then respond based on those truths and not the deceptions that can continue to run through our mind. And again, one of the biggest deceptions that we base our decisions on in our life is comparison to others. Right? And so many times, again, we base our decisions and our feelings about ourselves and our own situation based on what we see in other people's lives and not on what's true in ours. And yet, again, the fact remains that all we see of other people is their highlight reels. Right? And we compare their highlight reels to our behind-the-scene footage, and we always come up short. But God is saying, no, take a time out, step back, focus on me, and then focus on the truth of who you are, and then respond based on those truths, not on the deceptions of the world. And if we are able to do that, as we continue to, again, refocus our hearts and lives, just like we see in Habakkuk's mind and heart, right, is then we have a chance to respond in worship. And that's exactly the way that he responds. And again, we're not going to take the time to read it this morning, but I encourage you to, sometime this week, go read the rest of chapter 3. Right? And see where he goes with that, what his true response is as he praises and worships God. And to see the transformation between the first few verses in chapter 1 and all of chapter 3. Right? And again, that same transformation, that spiritual journey, that growth is what God wants for each of us. Right? As we continue to move forward, as we can be honest with God about our doubts and our struggles, about our frustrations, right? So that he can truly work through them. So my final thought for you this morning is that life on this earth rarely makes sense. But no matter what, God is truth and he is in control. He's the one that's in control, not us. Right? And he is the truth. And so when life doesn't make sense, and it rarely does, in those times and situations, we can follow Habakkuk's example, right, of this transformation, this journey that he went on, this journey of growth in his faith. And again, my hope is that we will all continue to grow in our own faith, right, and as we follow his example.